Chapter 10. The Cheshire Industry, the Rise of British Salt Trade. 1. Caesar's Salinators, Roman origins in Northwich and Nantwich. Long before the Industrial Revolution transformed Cheshire into a forest of chimneys, the Romans recognized something valuable: the region's saline springs, natural brine bubbling up from the earth. Following the invasion of Britain in 43 AD, Roman engineers pushed northward. They were called Salinators. They discovered a series of natural springs flowing in the valleys of the Weaver and Wheelock rivers. They founded settlements at Northwich and Nantwich. These locations became Salinae, sacred industrial hubs. To the Romans, salt was more than a commodity. It was salarium, the very substance that paid their soldiers, that preserved the rations of an empire on the march. The Roman method in Cheshire was brilliantly efficient. Unlike the vast rock salt mines of Galicia, the Romans focused on brine boiling. They tapped into natural springs where underground waters had dissolved deep salt beds. The salt rose to the surface as potent liquid. The Salinators constructed salt houses. These featured sophisticated leaden pans called plumbum. They placed these pans over clay furnaces. The air in Roman Northwich was thick with heavy white steam. As the brine simmered, water vanished into the damp British sky. What remained was fine, crystalline white gold, more valuable than the grain it would season. The geography of these settlements was dictated entirely by salt. The suffix "wich" became a hallmark of Cheshire salt towns. Many historians believe it has roots in the Roman word Wiches, a trading settlement dedicated to salt. Northwich and Nantwich were positioned strategically at critical river crossings, at junctions of Roman roads. This ensured salt could be transported swiftly to military fortifications along Hadrian's Wall or south toward London. The Roman presence transformed Cheshire from wild woodland to calculated industrial zone. The sensory experience of a Roman salt works was intense: relentless heat, the sharp metallic scent of boiling brine. The leaden pans were often stamped with the mark of the legion or the reigning emperor. These were the first step in a 2,000-year history of British salt production. These early Salinators laid the foundations of a trade that would eventually dominate the world's ports.
2. From open pans to deep mines, the 1670 discovery. For over 16 centuries after the Romans left, the Cheshire salt trade remained a surface pursuit, tied to natural brine springs that bubbled through the marshes. Then, in 1670, a momentous accident occurred. It would rewrite the geological and economic destiny of England. While searching for coal on William Marbury's estate at Marbury Lane, Northwich, prospectors drilled. Their drills bypassed the expected coal seams. Instead, they crunched into something different: translucent, glittering, immensely hard. They had accidentally pierced the ceiling of an underground cathedral, the first massive bed of rock salt ever discovered in Britain. This discovery marked a revolutionary shift from the aqueous to the mineral era. Previously, salt production was slow, weather-dependent, a process of boiling surface brine. The 1670 find revealed something extraordinary. Beneath the rolling Cheshire pastures lay a gargantuan solid slab of halite, the Lower Kuper haliferous bed, formed over 220 million years ago. This wasn't a liquid spring. This was a mountain buried beneath the ground. The news sent shockwaves through the British merchant class. England no longer needed to rely solely on the Wiches, the brine towns, or expensive imports from the Bay of Biscay. She had her own white gold mines, rivaling those of Poland and Austria. The transition from open pans to deep mines was a descent into new industrial darkness. The first shafts were sunk with primitive tools, cutting through layers of gypsum and red marl until the pickaxes finally struck the crystalline floor. Unlike the artistic, cathedral-like chambers of Wiches, the early Cheshire mines were rugged, purely utilitarian. Miners worked by flickering candlelight,
carving out massive square pillars of salt to hold up the unstable earth above. The air in these deep mines was cool and strangely sterile, a sharp contrast to the humid, steam-choked salt houses on the surface. This 1670 discovery ignited a salt fever. It transformed sleepy agricultural hamlets into bustling industrial towns. Northwich and Winsford boomed. Rock salt could now be shipped to coastal refineries or crushed for industrial use. Salt went from being a local, seasonal product to a global export powerhouse. This laid the logistical groundwork for British Empire dominance. It was the moment Cheshire ceased to be a collection of springs and became the salt cellar of the world.
3. The Brine Pumping Act, managing the legacy of subsidences. The industrial triumph of Cheshire's salt trade came with a terrifying price. The ground was literally vanishing. As the 19th century progressed, intensive extraction of wild brine created massive underground voids. Wild brine was a process where groundwater flowed over rock salt beds, then pumped to the surface. When these hidden salt pillars dissolved, the earth above couldn't sustain its own weight. This led to the era of subsidences, a slow-motion catastrophe. Houses, roads, even entire lakes were swallowed by the shifting crust. The visual landscape of Northwich and Winsford became surreal. Buildings were constructed on jack screws and timber frames, designed to be raised or lowered as the earth sank beneath them. It wasn't uncommon for residents to wake up and find their front door jammed or their parlor floor sloping at a 20-degree angle toward a newly formed abyss. The most dramatic manifestation was the formation of the Wichen flashes, vast, eerie lakes that appeared overnight where meadows had once stood, collapsing mines filled with water. The towns of Cheshire were becoming islands on a dissolving foundation, a crisis that finally forced British Parliament to intervene, the Brine Pumping Act of 1891. The act was pioneering environmental legislation designed to manage the legacy of subsidences by imposing a tax on every ton of salt produced. This compensation fund provided relief to property owners whose homes were being claimed by the brine. But the act was more than just financial. It forced a revolution in engineering. It encouraged a shift away from wild brine pumping toward more controlled methods, like controlled solution mining, where the shape of underground caverns was monitored to prevent catastrophic runs of brine that led to surface collapses. Managing this legacy required unique Cheshire ingenuity. Engineers developed floating foundations, flexible utility pipes that could bend without breaking as the ground shifted. The Brine Pumping Act represents the moment when the British salt industry had to reckon with the limits of extraction. It's a testament to a time when an entire region learned to live in constant crystalline flux, where the wealth of white gold was balanced against the terrifying reality of a world slowly, silently sinking into the sea from which it was born.
4. The Weaver and the Wheelock, lifelines of the Wiches. In the geography of British salt trade, the rivers Weaver and Wheelock were far more than waterways. They were silver arteries, pumping the lifeblood of Cheshire to the heart of the British Empire. Before the 18th century, transporting salt was grueling and expensive. Strings of pack horses navigated muddy, treacherous lanes. Then, the River Weaver was transformed into a navigable navigation, a feat of Georgian engineering. Everything changed. These rivers became the lifelines of the Wiches, essential conduits connecting the landlocked salt shires to the global maritime gateway of Liverpool. The visual character of the River Weaver was one of industrial grace. To facilitate massive export of salt, the river was tamed with a series of locks and weirs, turning a winding stream into a sophisticated hydraulic highway. The iconic sight on these waters was the Cheshire Salt Flat, a sturdy, broad-beamed wooden barge designed specifically to carry heavy crystalline cargo. These flats moved in long processions, their hulls sitting low under the weight of white gold, hauled by teams of horses along the towpaths. The air along the riverbanks was unique, the damp, earthy smell of Cheshire meadows mixed with a sharp saline tang wafting from the open holds of barges. The river Wheelock, though smaller, served as a vital secondary artery, feeding salt produced in southern Wiches like Sandbach and Middlewich into the main Weaver navigation. If the junctions where these rivers met, bustling industrial hubs emerged. These salt ports featured towering timber-framed warehouses, sophisticated gravity-fed loading chutes. Here, rock salt from deep mines and white salt from panhouses were transferred with relentless efficiency. The rivers acted as a filter. They took the raw terrestrial product of the mines, delivered it to the Mersey estuary, where it could be loaded onto deep-sea vessels bound for the fisheries of Newfoundland, the chemical works of America, the markets of India. Without the Weaver and the Wheelock, the Cheshire industry would have remained a local curiosity. These rivers provided the logistical momentum that allowed British salt to undercut its European competitors. They were silent partners in the Industrial Revolution, turning the tranquil Cheshire countryside into a global supply chain. To look upon the Weaver in its prime was to see the machinery of empire in motion, a liquid bridge linking the ancient salt beds of the deep earth to the farthest reaches of the sailing world.
5. Stoved versus fishery salt, commercial varieties and their uses. In the steam-choked pan houses of Victorian Cheshire, salt production wasn't uniform. It was a delicate craft of temperature control and timing. The salt boilers, called wallers, were masters of crystallization. They could manipulate the brine to produce distinct commercial varieties, tailored for specific global markets. The two most significant products were stoved salt and fishery salt. Though they shared the same chemical origin, their physical forms were completely different. One delicate as fallen snow, the other rugged as crushed glass. Stoved salt was the elite product, often called fine or table salt. It was produced by boiling brine rapidly at high temperature, around 107 degrees Celsius. This intense heat caused crystals to form with lightning speed, resulting in small, opaque, incredibly fine grains. Once harvested, this salt was pressed into wooden molds, formed into salt loaves or squares, then placed in high-temperature drying rooms called stoves to remove every trace of moisture. The result was brilliant, blindingly white salt, light, free-flowing, easily ground. This was the salt of the parlor, destined for elegant salt cellars of London, the growing middle-class kitchens of Europe, prized for its purity, its ability to dissolve instantly on the tongue. Fishery salt was completely different, a product designed for endurance rather than elegance. To create these crystals, wallers lowered the temperature of the pans to a slow simmer, around 38 to 45 degrees Celsius, left the brine to evaporate over several days. This slow boil allowed crystals to grow into massive, translucent, hard-edged cubes known as great salt. This variety was rugged, slow to dissolve, a quality that made it indispensable for global preservation trade. It was the salt of the sea, shipped by the ton to the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, the herring stations of Scotland. Because it dissolved slowly, it provided steady, long-term cure for fish and meats packed in barrels for long voyages, ensuring the protein of the empire remained untainted by decay. Beyond these two, Cheshire produced a spectrum of common salts, used for alkali works, bay salt for specialized curing. The classification of these varieties turned Cheshire salt works into a sophisticated laboratory of textures. Every shipment leaving the Weaver navigation was a calculated response to specific human need, whether it was fine stoved dust needed for a baker's loaf in Manchester, or heavy fishery crystals required to preserve a season's catch in the North Atlantic. This mastery of the crystal's architecture allowed Cheshire to dominate the global market, proving that in the world of salt, texture was as valuable as the mineral itself.